Chapter 33. Poison Pens. For all the power the tabloids wielded over the fate of Peter Wheeler, there remained one last card he held against them: his steadfast refusal to act like a guilty man. The newspapers were at a standstill, having analyzed, scrutinized, and exaggerated Wheeler's every facial tic for the past 5 months. Even with the verdict, there remained a small but vocal minority that recognized the case against Wheeler was entirely circumstantial and the wrong man had been convicted. Robert Payne captured the absurdity of the situation best when he wrote, "It remains the fact that he was condemned, not because he went to the house at midnight and murdered the girl but because he made her a harmless visit in the evening." Pursuant to their sales strategy of reporting all Wheeler, all the time, a number of broadsheets pressed into service a duplicitous ploy, one that had proven highly successful in the past. The press would announce that Wheeler had made a very public suicide attempt. The reasoning behind the declaration was two-pronged. First, it would convince those last lingering skeptics that he was, in fact, guilty. Second, it would keep Wheeler on the front page a few days longer. The 10-week gap between his sentence and execution loomed like an unfordable abyss that hovered foremost in the mind of every editor on the eastern seaboard. Coming up with fresh copy to bridge the gap seemed a near Herculean task. A fresh scandal, particularly something as torrid and unsavory as a suicide attempt, was just the ticket they needed to keep the story alive. The problem, of course, was Peter Wheeler. After his momentary lapse during sentencing, Wheeler was once again the picture of bonhomie, resilience, and quiet grace under pressure. The man may have fallen into the ninth circle of hell, but he greeted the challenge head-on. Even the most vehemently anti-Wheeler news agencies conceded that Wheeler was in good spirits, and indulged in jokes and frivolous talking at a time when most mortals would have cracked or run mad. The condemned man's unworldly ability to roll with the punches frustrated their every effort to portray him as a guilt-riddled menace to society. By this point, Peter Wheeler had long since ceased to be an actual person to the scriveners in the press corps. Rather, he became the lead character in the continuing saga of the Bear River tragedy, a literary device subject to the whims of the creative forces crafting the script. As such, Wheeler was a puppet who could be made to say or do anything, for such are the joys of writing fiction. The question now was simply how far were the media prepared to go to create their masterpiece. On July 1st, as Wheeler was led manacled and damned to his cell in the Kentville jail, the Morning Chronicle ran the following strategically timed, well-placed account. Some time ago the jailer found in a corner of Wheeler's cell a small bottle among some papers. He took it in his possession and kept it till this afternoon. The bottle contained a dark drug and is labeled outside poison. Be careful. Detective Power now has it in his possession. As soon as Wheeler was taken from the court to the jail, he made for the corner of the cell where the bottle was, and he became greatly excited when he could not find it. The jailer told him where it was, and he became much alarmed. The supposition is that he intended to end his life after the sentence had been passed on him. The report was a salmagundi of every literary contrivance in a writer's bag of tricks. It had an accessible allusion. The tiny bottle so cartoonishly labeled was a clear nod to Lewis Carroll's Drink Me bottle from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, although others saw a more classical reference. One pundit, perhaps spying the office copy of the complete works of Shakespeare, likened it to the apothecary scene in Romeo and Juliet. The story also had the requisite conflict with the protagonist's arch-nemesis, in this case ably played by the unnamed jailer, with a brief cameo appearance by everyone's favorite leading man, Detective Power. As expected, the gripping tale of the condemned man's desperate suicide attempt drove sales for the Chronicle and its affiliates through the roof, leaving competing papers that had missed the scoop with the option of reporting on the report. Although Wheeler resolutely clung to his trump card, refusing to buckle to satisfy the media, the press had their own ace up their collective sleeves: human nature. Embedded in our cumulative DNA is the tendency to accept as fact anything that supports or confirms what we already believe to be true. Whether Wheeler was actually suicidal was by no means as important as the public perception that he must be, as surely the reality of Wheeler's circumstances would drive any man to thoughts of suicide. All that a savvy reporter needed to do was imply Wheeler intended to take his own life, add a few salient but unverifiable details, and readers would fill in the gaps for themselves. Where, pray tell, was the ethical dilemma in that? More than a century on, the story of Wheeler's purported suicide plot reads like a twist in a dime store novel. The specifics of the report cannot be verified as records from the Kentville jail were destroyed in a subsequent fire. There is no mention of the incident in the court record or in any of the countless interviews Detective Power gave to the press. In all likelihood, the story is a complete fabrication, a propitious figment of an ambitious reporter's imagination. Although far less probable, a disturbing alternative must also be considered. The stringer for the Chronicle was granted an interview with the prisoner as he sat in the Kentville jail during the trial, one of several reporters afforded such access. It is possible the reporter either planted the vial in the cell, knowing its discovery would be made public, or slipped it to Wheeler in the misguided hope he might actually use it when the time was right. The melodramatic label on the bottle left little question as to its content or purpose. Had Wheeler somehow procured it on his own, it is absurd to think he would affix so blatant a disclaimer on the bottle. Throughout Wheeler's ordeal, the perfect piece of the puzzle had a funny way of turning up in the press at exactly the right moment. Whether by accident or design, Wheeler's so-called suicide bid was big news and the Morning Chronicle profited handsomely from it. It was a heavy-handed ploy, in equal parts crass, exploitive, and unforgettable. Somewhere, the gods of yellow journalism were smiling.